In 1844, deep within the sugar parishes of Louisiana, the Beauregard plantation harbored secrets that would remain buried for over 180 years. When descendants found a leather-bound diary hidden behind false walls in the plantation's main house, the cryptic entries revealed a systematic program of forced breeding and the disappearance of entire families. The diary contained names, dates, and coded references to transactions that never appeared in official records. Transactions involving human lives that were erased from history. This discovery would shatter a family's legacy and expose one of the most disturbing chapters of Louisiana's plantation system, where sugar profits were built not just on labor, but on the deliberate destruction of enslaved families for financial gain. Chapter 1. The Discovery That Changed Everything. Over 180 years ago, in a sugar plantation deep within Louisiana's parishes, military inspectors and local authorities mentioned a case so disturbing that it ended up buried in silence. The Beauregard family disappeared from official records, but not from the oral memory of the community. The absence left deep scars, marking generations with a silent trauma that is only now beginning to be revealed. Before continuing, subscribe and activate the bell. Here we unearth secrets buried by official history and give voice to what was silenced. Sarah Beauregard Morrison had never set foot in the old family mansion until the spring of 2023. The imposing structure, with its white columns and wraparound galleries, had stood empty for decades after her great-grandmother's death. As the last living descendant, Sarah inherited not just the property, but the weight of a legacy she never wanted to understand. The house, built in 1838 on what was once one of Louisiana's most profitable sugar plantations, carried the suffocating atmosphere of abandoned places. Each room whispered stories that no one had dared to tell. Sarah had come to prepare the property for sale, hoping to finally close this chapter of family history that had always made her uncomfortable. It was while examining the master bedroom that she noticed something odd. The wall behind the armoire didn't match the others. The wood planks were slightly different, as if they had been added later. Driven by curiosity, and perhaps by something deeper, Sarah began removing the panels. Behind the false wall, wrapped in oiled cloth and hidden for over a century, was a leather-bound diary. The diary bore no name on its cover, just a date, 1844. The pages, yellowed by time but surprisingly well preserved, contained entries written in elegant but hurried handwriting. The first entries seemed innocuous: weather reports, sugar production notes, social visits. But as Sarah read deeper, the content became increasingly disturbing. The entries spoke of breeding stock and genetic improvements. Names were listed with ages, physical descriptions, and what appeared to be genealogical charts tracking bloodlines. But these weren't records of livestock. They were records of human beings. Enslaved people were categorized by their breeding potential, their children tracked like inventory, families systematically separated to maximize what the diary's author called productive outcomes. Sarah's hands trembled as she continued reading. The diary detailed a program that went far beyond typical plantation operations. This wasn't just about forced labor. This was about the deliberate manipulation of human reproduction, the systematic destruction of families, and the treatment of people as nothing more than breeding animals for profit. The most chilling discovery came on page 47, a list of names under the heading "Disappeared, No Questions." 23 names, including entire families. Next to each name was a single word: disposed. The dates ranged from March to December 1844, suggesting a systematic process of elimination that lasted nearly a year. Sarah realized she was holding evidence of crimes that had been hidden for over 180 years. The diary wasn't just a historical document, it was a confession to horrors that official records had deliberately omitted. The Beauregard family wealth, the foundation of their social status, had been built not just on sugar and slave labor, but on the calculated destruction of human lives. As night fell over the old plantation, Sarah found herself unable to leave. The diary demanded to be read, each page revealing new depths of systematic cruelty. She was no longer just cleaning out an old house. She was uncovering evidence of one of Louisiana's darkest secrets, a secret that would explain why her family had always been haunted by shadows they refused to acknowledge. Chapter 2. The Master's Design. The diary's early entries, dating from January 1844, revealed the methodical mind of Jean-Baptiste Beauregard, the plantation's owner. Unlike typical plantation records that focused on crop yields and weather patterns, these pages detailed what he called his Human Improvement Project, a systematic breeding program designed to maximize both the physical capabilities and monetary value of enslaved people. Jean-Baptiste had inherited the plantation from his father in 1843, along with 127 enslaved people. But he wasn't content with traditional sugar cultivation. His diary revealed extensive correspondence with other plantation owners across Louisiana, sharing what he termed scientific approaches to human livestock management. The entries showed a man obsessed with profit margins who saw enslaved people not as human beings, but as biological resources to be optimized. The plantation's location in St. James Parish made it ideal for Jean-Baptiste's purposes. Surrounded by other large sugar estates, it was isolated enough to conduct operations without scrutiny from authorities in New Orleans. The diary revealed that Jean-Baptiste had specifically chosen women he considered ideal for bearing children, separating them from their families and housing them in a special section of the quarters he called the Nursery Complex. By March 1844, the diary documented that Jean-Baptiste had identified 12 women between the ages of 16 and 25 for his breeding program. Their names were listed with clinical precision: Marie-Claire, 19, excellent hips, strong constitution; Josephine, 22, previous healthy births, compliant nature; Celeste, 18, tall frame, good teeth, virgin condition, suitable for controlled pairing. The men selected for the program were chosen based on physical strength and what Jean-Baptiste termed genetic superiority. The diary revealed that he had purchased specific men from other plantations, paying premium prices for what he considered ideal breeding stock. These men were given better food and housing, but only as long as they participated in the program without resistance. Jean-Baptiste's entries showed meticulous record-keeping of every aspect of the breeding program. He tracked menstrual cycles, documented pregnancies, and recorded the physical characteristics of newborns. Children were evaluated at birth and categorized as either prime stock for continuation or disposal candidates. The cold clinical language made clear that he viewed these human beings as nothing more than livestock. The diary also revealed Jean-Baptiste's correspondence with a Dr. Etienne Moreau, a physician from New Orleans who provided medical supervision for the breeding program. Dr. Moreau's letters, copied into the diary, discussed methods for ensuring maximum fertility and preventing complications that might reduce productive capacity. The collaboration between plantation owner and medical professional added a veneer of scientific legitimacy to what were fundamentally crimes against humanity. By summer 1844, the diary documented the first successful outcomes of the program. 3 women had given birth to children that Jean-Baptiste considered excellent specimens. But success came at a horrific cost. The diary coldly noted that 5 women had failed to adapt to the program requirements and had been transferred to alternative arrangements, a euphemism that would become chillingly clear in later entries. The psychological trauma inflicted on the enslaved community was documented with disturbing indifference. Jean-Baptiste noted initial resistance and emotional disturbances among participants, which were managed through what he called behavioral correction protocols. a combination of physical punishment, psychological intimidation, and the threat of separation from any remaining family members. The diary entries from this period revealed a man who had completely dehumanized the people under his control. Jean-Baptiste wrote about enslaved people with the same detachment he used to describe farm equipment or livestock. Their suffering was merely an operational challenge to be managed, their resistance a problem to be solved through more effective control mechanisms. Chapter 3. The disappearances begin now. I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are listening to this story. I want to know how far these silenced accounts reach. The autumn months of 1844 marked a dark turning point in the diary's narrative. What had begun as Jean-Baptiste's systematic breeding program evolved into something far more sinister as problems within the enslaved community began to emerge. The diary entries from September revealed that several people had attempted to resist the program, while others had tried to escape or contact authorities. The first disappearance was documented on September 15, 1844. Thomas, a 34-year-old man who had been brought from a plantation in West Feliciana Parish, specifically for the breeding program, was noted as eliminated due to persistent interference with program objectives. The diary entry was brief, but chilling. Thomas disposed of quietly. Dr. Moreau confirms no trace evidence. Community informed he was sold to Texas Plantation. But Thomas had not been sold. The diary's later entries revealed that he had been killed and buried somewhere on the plantation grounds after he had organized other enslaved people to resist participation in the breeding program. His elimination was meant to serve as a warning to others, though Jean-Baptiste was careful to maintain the fiction that resistant individuals were simply sold to distant plantations. The pattern continued throughout October. Marie-Claire, one of the women originally selected for the breeding program, disappeared after she had attempted to contact a Catholic priest in the nearby town of Convent. Her diary entry read, Marie-Claire became unreliable after failed pregnancy. Dr. Moreau handled disposal, told others she died of fever, arranged visible burial with coffin filled with stones. The mock funeral was part of Jean-Baptiste's strategy to maintain control while eliminating witnesses to his crimes. The enslaved community was forced to attend these false burials, creating trauma while reinforcing the illusion that deaths were natural rather than murder. The psychological warfare was as calculated as the physical violence. By November 1844, the diary documented that 8 people had been disposed of for various infractions related to the breeding program. Some had attempted escape, others had tried to protect family members from participation, and several had simply refused to comply with Jean-Baptiste's demands. Each elimination was carefully planned to avoid suspicion from neighboring plantations or authorities. The diary revealed that Dr. Moreau played a crucial role in the disappearances. As a respected physician, he provided medical cover for the deaths, creating false death certificates when needed and ensuring that bodies were disposed of in ways that would prevent discovery. His medical knowledge made him an ideal partner in concealing evidence of systematic murder. The most horrific entries came in late November, when Jean-Baptiste documented the elimination of an entire family. Jacques, a skilled carpenter, had discovered evidence of the murders and threatened to expose the operation. Rather than risk exposure, Jean-Baptiste decided that Jacques, his wife Celeste, and their 2 young children had to be eliminated. The diary entry was matter of fact. Jacques family unit compromised security. All 4 disposed of November 28th. Community told they were sold as family unit to Mississippi planter. The disappearance of the Jacques family marked a turning point. Other enslaved people began to realize that their friends and family members were not being sold. They were being murdered. Fear gripped the quarters. But that fear also bred desperate resistance. The diary entries from December revealed increasing tension as Jean-Baptiste struggled to maintain control over a community that was beginning to understand the full horror of their situation. The killing had become so systematic that Jean-Baptiste created a code system in his diary to track the eliminated individuals. Names were marked with specific symbols: a cross for those killed for resistance, a circle for those eliminated as witnesses, and a triangle for those who had simply become inconvenient to the breeding program's operations. The final entries of 1844 showed a man who had crossed a line from which there was no return. Jean-Baptiste had created a reign of terror disguised as plantation management, where any sign of resistance or knowledge could result in death. The breeding program had become secondary to the systematic elimination of anyone who posed a threat to his secret. Chapter 4. The Doctor's Complicity. The diary entries from early 1845 revealed the full extent of Dr. Etienne Moreau's involvement in Jean-Baptiste's horrific program. Far from being a reluctant participant, the New Orleans physician had become the architect of the medical aspects of both the breeding program and the systematic elimination of witnesses. Dr. Moreau's letters, meticulously copied into the diary, showed a man who had abandoned all medical ethics in pursuit of what he called advancing the science of human husbandry. His correspondence with Jean-Baptiste discussed not only methods for maximizing fertility among enslaved women, but also techniques for disposing of problematic individuals in ways that would avoid detection by authorities. The doctor visited the Beauregard plantation monthly, ostensibly to provide medical care to the enslaved population. These visits provided perfect cover for his true activities. The diary revealed that Dr. Moreau had established a makeshift medical facility in one of the plantation's outbuildings, where he conducted examinations related to the breeding program and performed what he euphemistically called terminal medical procedures on those marked for elimination. One of the most disturbing aspects of Dr. Moreau's involvement was his systematic documentation of the crimes. The diary contained copies of his medical notes, written in clinical language that masked the horror of his actions. He recorded details about the physical and psychological effects of the breeding program on the women involved, treating their trauma as scientific data rather than evidence of human suffering. Dr. Moreau's expertise proved invaluable in concealing evidence of the murders. The diary revealed that he had developed methods for disposing of bodies that would prevent their discovery even decades later. Some victims were dissolved in acid obtained from sugar processing operations, while others were buried in locations where the remains would be quickly decomposed by Louisiana's humid climate and acidic soil conditions. The physician's medical reputation in New Orleans provided additional protection for the operation. When questions occasionally arose about deaths on the Beauregard plantation, Dr. Moreau's signed death certificates were rarely questioned by local authorities. His standing in the medical community made him an unassailable witness to the supposed natural causes of death among the enslaved population. The diary entries showed that Dr. Moreau had also developed psychological techniques for maintaining control over the surviving enslaved population. He used his medical authority to convince people that resistance to the breeding program would result in illness or death, creating a climate of fear that made physical coercion less necessary. His medical knowledge became a weapon of psychological warfare. By spring 1845, the collaboration between Jean-Baptiste and Dr. Moreau had evolved into a sophisticated operation that combined systematic sexual exploitation with calculated murder. The diary revealed that they had begun corresponding with other plantation owners interested in implementing similar programs, suggesting that the Beauregard plantation was intended as a model for widespread adoption of these practices. The financial aspects of their partnership were also documented in detail. Dr. Moreau received payment not only for his medical services, but also for his role in the elimination program. The diary showed payments of $50 per successful disposal and bonuses for developing new methods of concealment. The doctor had found a profitable sideline in systematic murder. The most chilling revelation was Dr. Moreau's proposal to expand the operation. His letters suggested establishing multiple breeding facilities across Louisiana, with himself serving as the medical coordinator for a network of plantations engaged in similar programs. The Beauregard plantation would serve as a training ground for overseers and medical personnel who could implement the system elsewhere. The diary entries from this period revealed two men who had completely abandoned any pretense of moral behavior. Jean-Baptiste provided the resources and isolation needed for their crimes, while Dr. Moreau provided the medical expertise and social respectability that made the operation possible. Together, they had created a system of exploitation and murder that operated under the guise of agricultural innovation and medical advancement. Chapter 5. The Community's Silent Suffering. The diary entries from mid-1845 provided glimpses into the psychological devastation that Jean-Baptiste's program inflicted on the enslaved community at Beauregard Plantation. Beyond the documented murders and systematic sexual exploitation, the survivors faced daily terror that shaped every aspect of their existence. The quarters, once a place where enslaved families could find moments of respite and community, had become a landscape of fear and suspicion. The diary noted that normal social patterns had broken down as people became afraid to form close relationships, knowing that attachment could lead to devastating loss. Children no longer played freely, women avoided gathering together, and men spoke in whispers when they spoke at all. Jean-Baptiste's entries revealed his awareness of the psychological impact and his deliberate use of terror as a management tool. He noted that productivity initially decreased as fear gripped the community, but he viewed this as a temporary adjustment period. His solution was to increase the violence and unpredictability of eliminations, ensuring that no one could feel safe regardless of their behavior. The diary documented specific examples of the community's attempts to cope with their impossible situation. Some people tried to protect others by volunteering for the breeding program or accepting punishment for minor infractions, hoping to redirect Jean-Baptiste's attention away from family members. These acts of sacrifice were noted in the diary with cold indifference, simply recorded as examples of improved compliance. Religious faith became both a source of comfort and a dangerous liability for the enslaved community. The diary revealed that Jean-Baptiste viewed any form of organized religious activity as a potential threat to his control. Prayer meetings were forbidden, and anyone caught leading religious services faced immediate elimination. Yet the diary also noted that people continued to practice their faith in secret, gathering in small groups in the woods or holding silent prayers in their quarters. The isolation of families selected for the breeding program created additional trauma within the community. The diary showed that Jean-Baptiste deliberately housed these families separately, preventing them from maintaining connections with the broader enslaved population. This isolation served multiple purposes. It reduced the likelihood of organized resistance while also creating psychological pressure that made compliance more likely. Children bore a particular burden in this environment of systematic terror. The diary noted that children as young as 12 were evaluated for future participation in the breeding program, creating a climate where childhood essentially ended at the onset of adolescence. Parents lived with the constant fear that their children would be selected, while children grew up knowing that their bodies and their futures were not their own. The diary revealed that some people found ways to resist, despite the overwhelming threat of violence. Small acts of defiance, sharing food with families in the breeding program, passing along information about missing community members, or simply maintaining human dignity in the face of dehumanization, continued even as the elimination program intensified. Traditional forms of enslaved community leadership collapsed under the pressure of Jean-Baptiste's program. The diary noted that respected elders and informal community leaders were specifically targeted for elimination if they showed any signs of organizing resistance or maintaining traditional authority structures. This systematic destruction of leadership left the community fragmented and vulnerable. The seasonal rhythms of plantation life, which had previously provided some structure and predictability, became sources of additional anxiety. The diary showed that Jean-Baptiste often used busy periods like harvest time to conduct eliminations, knowing that the disruption would be attributed to work demands rather than murder. The grinding season, traditionally a time of intense but shared labor, became a period when people simply disappeared. Language itself became a form of resistance and survival. The diary noted that the enslaved community developed coded ways of communicating about the dangers they faced, using religious metaphors and work-related terminology to share warnings about who might be targeted next. This linguistic adaptation showed the resilience of human communication even under conditions of extreme oppression. Chapter 6. The Network of Silence. If this story has already caught your attention, please like it. This helps name of family or plantation story reach more people. The diary entries from late 1845 revealed that Jean-Baptiste's operation was not an isolated aberration, but part of a broader network of Louisiana plantation owners who shared information and techniques for systematic exploitation and elimination programs. The correspondence copied into the diary showed connections to at least 6 other plantations across the sugar parishes. The network operated through what appeared to be legitimate business relationships and social connections among the plantation elite. Jean-Baptiste's diary documented visits from other plantation owners who came ostensibly to discuss sugar cultivation techniques, but actually to observe and learn from his breeding and elimination programs. These visits were carefully planned to avoid attracting attention from local authorities or neighboring properties. Dr. Moreau served as a crucial link in this network, providing medical services to multiple plantations and facilitating the exchange of information between plantation owners. His medical practice gave him legitimate reasons to travel between properties, and his professional reputation provided cover for the technical assistance he provided to other operators of similar programs. The diary revealed that the network had developed standardized procedures for disposing of evidence and maintaining community silence. Methods for eliminating witnesses were shared through coded correspondence, while techniques for psychological control were refined through collective experience. What had begun as Jean-Baptiste's individual program had evolved into a systematic approach adopted across multiple properties. Financial arrangements within the network were also documented in the diary. Plantation owners shared costs for Dr. Moreau's specialized services, while profits from the breeding programs were sometimes pooled to fund expansion of operations. The diary showed payments between plantations for stud services and breeding stock, treating human beings as livestock to be bought, sold, and traded between facilities. The network's influence extended beyond plantation boundaries into local government and law enforcement. The diary contained references to payments made to parish officials and law enforcement officers to ensure that investigations into disappearances remained superficial. Local judges and politicians received regular financial contributions that guaranteed their cooperation in maintaining silence about suspicious deaths and disappearances. Religious institutions also played a role in maintaining the network's secrecy. The diary revealed that certain Catholic priests received donations from plantation owners in exchange for their silence about confessions or reports they might receive regarding the elimination programs. These corrupted religious figures provided spiritual cover for systematic murder, using their moral authority to discourage resistance and questioning. The geographical distribution of network plantations was strategic, spanning multiple parishes to make coordination more difficult for any potential investigators. Properties were located in areas where local officials were either corrupted or intimidated, while the isolation of individual plantations made it difficult for enslaved communities to share information about the scope of the programs. Communication within the network relied on coded language and trusted intermediaries. The diary showed that plantation owners used euphemisms and agricultural terminology to discuss their crimes in correspondence that might be intercepted. Breeding stock referred to enslaved people, crop failures indicated eliminations, and soil improvement described the disposal of bodies. The network also shared intelligence about potential threats to their operations. The diary documented warnings passed between plantations about abolitionists, suspicious government officials, or enslaved people who might pose risks to the programs. This information sharing allowed plantation owners to coordinate their responses to potential exposure. By early 1846, the diary revealed that the network was planning to expand operations to include plantations in Mississippi and Alabama. Jean-Baptiste and Dr. Moreau were developing training programs for overseers and medical personnel who could implement similar systems in new locations. The Beauregard plantation was intended to serve as a model facility where techniques could be refined and personnel trained. The most disturbing aspect of the network was its systematic nature. These were not isolated acts of violence by individual plantation owners, but coordinated programs implemented across multiple properties with shared resources and standardized procedures. The network had industrialized both sexual exploitation and murder, creating systems that could operate efficiently across large geographical areas. Chapter 7. The Beginning of the End. The diary entries from spring 1846 marked the beginning of Jean-Baptiste's downfall, though the full collapse of his operation would not come for several more months. The first signs of trouble appeared when a new priest, Father Maurice Thibodeau, was assigned to the parish church that served the Beauregard plantation and surrounding properties. Unlike his predecessor, who had been corrupted by payments from the plantation network, Father Thibodeau was not immediately brought into the conspiracy of silence. The diary revealed Jean-Baptiste's growing concern as the priest began making regular visits to plantation quarters and asking questions about missing community members. Several entries documented Jean-Baptiste's unsuccessful attempts to bribe or intimidate the new priest. The diary showed that Father Thibodeau had begun collecting information about disappearances across multiple plantations in the area. His religious authority gave him access to enslaved communities that government officials lacked, and his integrity made him a threat that the network had not previously faced. By June 1846, the diary revealed that plantation owners were meeting to discuss the priest problem and potential solutions. Dr. Moreau's involvement in the network began to attract unwanted attention from medical colleagues in New Orleans. The diary documented concerns raised by other physicians about the unusually high death rates reported from plantations where Dr. Moreau provided medical services. While these concerns had not yet reached formal investigation levels, they represented a potential threat to the entire operation. The enslaved community at Beauregard Plantation, emboldened by Father Thibodeau's presence and questions, began to show signs of organized resistance for the first time since the elimination program had begun. The diary revealed that Jean-Baptiste was increasingly paranoid about potential uprisings and was considering eliminating larger numbers of people to prevent organized resistance from developing. Financial pressures also began to mount against Jean-Baptiste's operation. The diary showed that the constant need to replace eliminated workers was becoming economically unsustainable, while the breeding program had not yet produced sufficient numbers of children to offset the loss of adult workers. The plantation's sugar production was declining as fear and violence disrupted normal work patterns. The network of plantation owners began to fracture as individual operators became concerned about their exposure to legal consequences. The diary documented heated discussions between Jean-Baptiste and other network members about whether to suspend operations temporarily or to eliminate Father Thibodeau and other potential witnesses. The unity that had previously protected the network was breaking down under pressure. A crucial turning point came in August 1846, when one of the plantation owners in the network, Alphonse Boudreau, of St. John the Baptist Parish, was arrested on unrelated charges involving debt and fraud. The diary revealed Jean-Baptiste's terror that Boudreau might provide information about the elimination programs in exchange for leniency on his financial crimes. The diary entries from this period showed a man increasingly consumed by paranoia and desperation. Jean-Baptiste began eliminating people not because they posed direct threats to his operation, but because he feared they might pose future threats. The systematic nature of his previous eliminations gave way to panic-driven killings that increased the risk of discovery. Dr. Moreau, sensing the changing situation, began distancing himself from the plantation network. The diary revealed that he was reducing his visits to plantation sites and destroying medical records that might implicate him in the programs. His withdrawal left Jean-Baptiste without the medical expertise that had been crucial to concealing evidence of his crimes. The autumn of 1846 brought the first direct official inquiry into disappearances at the Beauregard plantation. Father Thibodeau had finally convinced a parish judge to investigate reports of missing enslaved people, though the diary showed that Jean-Baptiste still believed his network of corrupted officials would protect him from serious consequences. The diary's tone during this period reflected Jean-Baptiste's recognition that his operation was becoming unsustainable. Yet rather than abandoning his programs, he seemed determined to eliminate as much evidence as possible, including human witnesses, before any official investigation could uncover the full scope of his crimes. Chapter 8. The Final Eliminations. The diary entries from late 1846 and early 1847 documented Jean-Baptiste's increasingly desperate attempts to eliminate all evidence of his crimes before official investigations could expose the full scope of his operation. What had been systematic murder became frenzied killing as he sought to silence every potential witness to his breeding and elimination programs. The arrival of investigators from the parish courthouse in October 1846 triggered what the diary called final security measures. Jean-Baptiste compiled a list of 17 enslaved people who possessed knowledge about the disappearances or the breeding program. His plan was to eliminate all of them before investigators could conduct interviews, then claim they had been sold to distant plantations. Dr. Moreau, despite his previous attempts to distance himself from the operation, was drawn back into the conspiracy by Jean-Baptiste's threats to expose their partnership. The diary revealed that the doctor provided Jean-Baptiste with a large quantity of poison, ostensibly for eliminating rats in the sugar mill, but actually intended for mass murder of potential witnesses. The elimination process began on October 15, 1846, with the poisoning of 3 elderly women who had served as informal midwives and healers in the enslaved community. These women possessed detailed knowledge about the breeding program and the fates of women who had failed to adapt to Jean-Baptiste's requirements. Their deaths were attributed to a sudden illness that Dr. Moreau confirmed as natural causes. The diary documented Jean-Baptiste's methodical approach to the final eliminations. Rather than conducting mass killings that might attract attention, he spread the murders over several weeks, using different methods and creating different explanations for each death. Some victims were poisoned, others were beaten, and their deaths attributed to accidents, while several simply disappeared during work details in remote areas of the plantation. The psychological pressure of conducting these final eliminations began to take a toll on Jean-Baptiste himself. The diary entries from this period showed signs of mental deterioration, with increasingly erratic handwriting and disjointed thoughts. He began to see potential threats everywhere, suspecting even loyal overseers of planning to betray him to investigators. Father Thibodeau's continued pressure for answers about missing community members forced Jean-Baptiste to accelerate his elimination schedule. The diary revealed that he had originally planned to conduct the killings over several months, but the priest's persistence meant that all potential witnesses needed to be eliminated within weeks. The most horrific entry in the entire diary described the elimination of the final witnesses on November 3, 1846. Jean-Baptiste gathered the remaining 12 people on his list in the plantation's sugar mill, ostensibly for a work assignment. Once they were assembled, he and 2 trusted overseers used axes and other farm implements to kill all 12 people. The bodies were then fed into the sugar mill's furnaces, leaving no physical evidence of the murders. The diary's description of this mass killing was written in a detached, clinical tone that made the horror even more chilling. Jean-Baptiste recorded details about the efficiency of different killing methods and the effectiveness of the furnaces in completely destroying evidence. He showed no recognition that he had just murdered 12 human beings, treating the event as simply another operational challenge that had been successfully resolved. With the elimination of all direct witnesses completed, Jean-Baptiste turned his attention to destroying documentary evidence. The diary revealed that he burned all official plantation records related to the breeding program and elimination operations. He also destroyed correspondence with other plantation owners in the network and eliminated financial records that might reveal payments for Dr. Moreau's specialized services. The final entries in the diary, dated December 1846, showed Jean-Baptiste's preparation for the official investigation that he knew was coming. He had created false records showing the sale of missing enslaved people to fictional plantation owners in Texas and Arkansas. He had coached his remaining overseers on the stories they should tell investigators, and he had prepared explanations for any evidence that might survive his destruction efforts. The diary ended abruptly in mid-December 1846. With no explanation for why Jean-Baptiste stopped writing, the final entry was a simple note: "All preparations complete. The secret dies with us." This ominous statement suggested that Jean-Baptiste was prepared to eliminate anyone else who might threaten his security, possibly including Dr. Moreau and his own overseers. Chapter 9. Buried Truth, Lasting Scars. Subscribe to the channel to learn about more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the case of the Beauregard plantation. See you in the next video. The official investigation that Jean-Baptiste had feared so desperately began in January 1847, but by then his systematic elimination of witnesses had made it nearly impossible to uncover the truth. Father Thibodeau provided investigators with names of missing enslaved people and testimonies about suspicious deaths, but without living witnesses or physical evidence, the inquiry could not proceed beyond preliminary questioning. The parish judge who conducted the investigation, Honorable Charles Duplessis, was one of the officials who had received regular payments from the plantation network. His investigation was deliberately superficial, focusing on Jean-Baptiste's explanations for the disappearances rather than seeking evidence that might contradict those explanations. The official report, completed in March 1847, concluded that no criminal activity had occurred at the Beauregard plantation. Dr. Moreau's medical testimony proved crucial in closing the investigation. His professional reputation and detailed death certificates for the eliminated individuals provided what appeared to be scientific evidence supporting Jean-Baptiste's claims that deaths had been from natural causes. The doctor's willingness to perjure himself under oath ensured that no further investigation would be conducted. The surviving members of the enslaved community at Beauregard Plantation carried the trauma of their experiences for the rest of their lives, but their testimonies were not considered credible evidence by the legal system of 1847. The systematic terror they had endured was dismissed as the exaggerations of unreliable witnesses, while their detailed knowledge of the crimes was ignored by investigators who had no interest in uncovering the truth. Jean-Baptiste continued operating the plantation until his death in 1852, though he never again attempted to implement breeding or elimination programs. The diary revealed that the investigation, despite its superficial nature, had convinced him that such operations were too risky to continue. He maintained his wealth and social standing in the community, and was remembered after his death as a successful sugar planter and respected member of Louisiana society. The broader network of plantation owners who had participated in similar programs gradually disbanded after the Beauregard investigation. While no criminal charges were ever filed against any of them, the scrutiny created by Father Thibodeau's inquiries convinced them to suspend their elimination programs. The systematic exploitation and murder that had characterized these operations for several years simply stopped, leaving no official acknowledgement that it had ever occurred. Father Thibodeau continued his efforts to uncover the truth about the disappearances until his transfer to another parish in 1849. His replacement was a priest who had been carefully selected by local authorities for his willingness to avoid controversial inquiries. The Catholic Church's institutional knowledge of the crimes died with Father Thibodeau's departure, ensuring that religious authorities would not pursue further investigation. The physical evidence of Jean-Baptiste's crimes remained buried on the plantation grounds for over 170 years. The locations where bodies had been disposed of became simply part of the landscape, with no markers or memories to indicate what lay beneath. The sugar mill, where the final mass killing had occurred, continued operating until the plantation's closure in the 1890s, processing sugar over the ashes of Jean-Baptiste's victims. Dr. Moreau continued his medical practice in New Orleans until his death in 1863, maintaining his reputation as a respected physician throughout his career. His role in the plantation elimination programs was never discovered by his medical colleagues or patients, and he took the secret of his crimes to his grave. His medical innovations, developed through his work with the Plantation Network, were credited to legitimate research and became part of standard medical practice. The Beauregard family maintained ownership of the plantation through several generations, with each new owner remaining ignorant of the crimes that had occurred on the property. The diary remained hidden behind the false wall where Jean-Baptiste had concealed it, waiting nearly 2 centuries for discovery by Sarah Beauregard Morrison. The discovery of the diary in 2023 finally provided evidence of crimes that had been successfully concealed for over 180 years. Yet even with this documentation, the passage of time has made legal consequences impossible, while the deaths of all involved parties ensures that justice for the victims will remain forever incomplete. The diary stands as testament to one of the darkest chapters in Louisiana's plantation history, revealing systematic crimes that were not aberrations, but part of organized networks of exploitation and murder. The silence that protected these crimes for nearly 2 centuries reflects the power structures that enabled such atrocities and the institutional failures that allowed them to continue without consequence. The truth may emerge decades later, but the scars of systematic silence and institutional complicity remain forever etched in the landscape of memory and forgotten graves.